You're just the help. Stay out of the way. She said it with a smile. Not even a hateful one, no. It was a smug, dismissive little smirk, like I was a speck of dust beneath her manicured thumb. And the worst part, she said it in my kitchen, in my house, while I was cooking dinner for her. My name is Margaret. I'm 67 years old. I've lived a quiet life, always believing that if you're kind, the world will be kind back to you. I raised my son, Daniel, mostly on my own after my husband passed away in a car accident when Daniel was just 10. It wasn't easy. I worked double shifts at the post office, cleaned houses on weekends, even crocheted blankets to sell at the local market to make ends meet. But Daniel never went without. I made sure of that. He was a bright boy. Sensitive, gentle, and so affectionate. When he got into college on a scholarship, I wept. Not because I was sad, oh no. I was proud. So proud. I had given everything I had, and it felt like the world was finally giving something back. He met Jessica during his second year. She was striking. The kind of girl who could walk into a room and make heads turn. Bullish. Ambitious. I didn't dislike her. Not at first. But something about her eyes always made me feel like I was being sized up. I ignored it though. Because if my son loved her, then I would love her too. When they married, I gave them everything I had left. Literally. I handed over the deed to my home. My house. It wasn't a mansion. Just a modest two-story in the suburbs, a bit worn from time, but filled with laughter and memories. Daniel had been struggling to find steady work, and Jessica's job required them to stay close to the city. So I told them they could live here with me. I even moved my things into the basement so they could have the master bedroom. I told myself it was temporary, that once they got on their feet, they'd move out and I could have my house back. But years passed. They stayed. And slowly, I became invisible in my own home. First, it was little things. Jessica suggested I knock before entering the living room when they had guests. She rearranged the kitchen, my kitchen, without asking. She started referring to the guest bathroom as theirs, and the upstairs as private space. Daniel didn't say much. He was always polite, still kissed my cheek every morning, but his eyes, they were tired, distant. I started to wonder if he even noticed how she spoke to me, how she treated me like a live-in maid. I still cooked for them, did their laundry. I didn't mind, not really. That's just who I am. Help. Serve. I've always believed love is shown through quiet acts. But one night everything changed. It was a Friday. I'd spent most of the afternoon preparing a roast, Daniel's favorite. I even baked an apple pie from scratch, just like I used to when he was a little boy. I wore my nicest cardigan, brushed my hair, even dabbed on a bit of lipstick. I wanted everything to be perfect. They came home late. Jessica kicked off her heels in the hallway, leaving them for me to pick up as usual. Daniel mumbled a tired greeting and went upstairs to shower. Jessica strutted into the kitchen, took one look at the table I'd set, and snorted. "You really went all out," she said. Her voice was dripping with sarcasm. "Trying to impress someone." I smiled, trying to ignore the sting. "Just thought it'd be nice to have a proper dinner together." She raised an eyebrow and opened the fridge. "We're meeting friends later. Didn't Daniel tell you?" "No, he didn't," I said softly. My hands were shaking just a little. "Well, maybe next time check before you play house. You're not the hostess here, Margaret. You're just the help." She said it so casually, like it wasn't the most degrading thing she could have uttered. And then she walked out. Just like that. I stood there, staring at the roast growing cold on the table. The pie sat untouched. My lipstick suddenly felt like a cruel joke. I had cooked, cleaned, and sacrificed for years, and now I was the help. I didn't cry. Not right away. I just stood there, motionless, as if the walls of my home were whispering, "You don't belong here anymore." Daniel came down a few minutes later, hair damp, shirt crisp. He looked confused when he saw me sitting alone. "Where's Jess?" "Out," I whispered. He sat down, poked at the food, and didn't say much else. Didn't ask why I looked like I'd aged 10 years in 10 minutes. Didn't notice the pie. Or maybe he did and chose not to speak. That night, I lay in bed in the basement, listening to the laughter echoing from upstairs. They were drinking, watching something on TV. Probably something loud and stupid. I stared at the ceiling and tried to remember when my house stopped feeling like mine. The next morning I got up early and began cleaning. Not because anyone asked. Just because it was what I did. Scrubbing was easier than thinking. Folding clothes was easier than crying. If I kept moving, maybe the ache in my chest would quiet down. But every time I picked up Jessica's blouse or rinsed out their wine glasses, her voice echoed in my ears. "You're just the help." It wasn't just cruel. It was calculated. She wanted me to feel small, doubt my place. And worse, she was winning. I'd sacrificed everything. My savings. My name on the deed. My room. My dignity. All to give my son and his wife a start. And now I was an unwanted shadow, haunting the halls of my own past. Something broke inside me that day. A quiet fracture, almost invisible. But I felt it clear as a church bell. Shift. A warning. That the pain I had been swallowing for years was finally reaching the brim. And something was about to spill. "You're not even family anymore, Margaret. You're just here." She said it over brunch, in front of her parents, like I was a piece of old furniture they were politely tolerating. My own son didn't flinch. He didn't defend me. He just sipped his coffee and nodded like he agreed. After that night, after she called me the help, I promised myself I'd create space. Not in some grand, angry way. No, I didn't yell or slam doors. That's never been me. But I quietly started stepping back. I stopped baking their favorite things. I stopped asking if they'd be home for dinner. I stopped picking up Jessica's dry cleaning or ironing Daniel's shirts before work. And do you know what happened? Nothing. They didn't notice. I suppose that was the real heartbreak. Not the insult, not the humiliation. But the realization that my absence was as invisible as my presence. My love, my care, my sacrifices. They had become background noise. I thought a lot about moving out. I still had some money tucked away. Emergency savings, I called it. But at my age, moving meant more than just packing boxes. It meant starting over, alone. And part of me still hoped things would change. That hope I see now was my weakness. A few weeks later, Jessica's parents came to stay for a long weekend. I cleaned the guest room from top to bottom. Fresh linens, polished windows. I even made a bouquet from the garden and placed it by the bedside. Not because I wanted to impress them, but because that's who I am. They arrived Friday evening, loud and glossy, the kind of people who think saying, "We're just down to earth," makes it true. Jessica immediately swooped in, acting like queen of the manor, guiding her parents around the house as if every lamp and curtain had been chosen by her. They barely acknowledged me. Nod. Half smile. At one point her mother asked, "And what's your role here, Margaret?" As if I were a live-in assistant. Jessica chimed in before I could answer. "Oh, she helps around the house. Daniel's mom. She's sort of part of the structure here." Part of the structure. Like a wall. Or a staircase. Her father looked at me, gave a small smile and asked, "So you're retired then?" He nodded. "Yes. Postal service, 32 years. "Good for you," he said before turning his attention to the wine rack. Dinner that night was unbearable. They discussed renovations. Jessica wanted to repaint my dining room. Her father offered to send someone. Daniel agreed, saying it was about time we updated. No one asked what I thought. No one remembered that I chose the paint, the trim, the chandelier. That I built a life here with my own hands. But the real slap came Sunday. They were hosting a brunch for some old family friends. People from Jessica's side. She asked me not to hover, and suggested I keep to the downstairs until the guests left. I was stunned. "You want me to hide?" I asked quietly. She laughed. "Don't be dramatic, Margaret. It's just... you wouldn't know anyone. You'd be bored. You know how these things are. Daniel." He looked at me, then at her and said nothing. So I did as she asked. I stayed in the basement. I sat in my little den with no windows and listened to laughter echo from above, like I was some stray dog tucked away before company came over. I only came up to grab a cup of tea. I crept past the kitchen, hoping no one would notice me. But Jessica did. She was standing with her friends near the fridge, laughing when she saw me. She stopped mid-sentence and said, "Oh, don't mind her. That's Margaret. She helps out sometimes." Her friends smiled awkwardly. One woman even said, "Oh, you're the housekeeper." Jessica didn't correct her. In fact, she chuckled. I stared at my son. He was across the room, leaning against the wall. He met my eyes for just a moment and looked away. That was when the pain turned to something else. Not rage, not yet, but a kind of cold clarity. They were never going to respect me. Not as a mother. Not as a human being. And if I stayed, it would only get worse. That night, when the guests left and the house was quiet again, I sat alone at the kitchen table. I poured myself a small glass of wine and stared at the flickering candle on the counter. Jessica walked in, heels in hand, makeup smudged. She grabbed a bottle of sparkling water from the fridge and turned to me. "I hope you didn't take anything personally today," she said casually. "It's just easier to explain things that way." I didn't answer. He took a sip. "You know, not everyone has your kind of old-fashioned pride. People don't really care about whose house it was first. They just see what's current. And right now, this is our home. You're just part of the background. So let's not make things awkward." I looked at her, really looked at her. For the first time, not as my daughter-in-law, but as a stranger standing in my kitchen, holding a drink like she owned the world. "Good night, Jessica," I said softly. I went back downstairs, closed the door, and sat in the dark. My hands were trembling. My heart was heavy. But something inside me had shifted. Not a crack this time, but a clean break. This wasn't my home anymore. Not really. But I was still Margaret. I was still a mother, woman, human being. And I would not die as someone else's ghost. Something had to change. I just didn't know what yet. But I was done being silent. I was done being the help. "If you don't like it, Margaret, maybe it's time you find somewhere else to be." That's what she said when I finally asked, quietly, respectfully, if they could treat me with a little more dignity. If perhaps I could be included in family dinners again. If maybe I could walk upstairs without feeling like I was intruding. Jessica said those words like she was doing me a favor. Like I was a burden being politely offered an exit. And Daniel. He didn't even look up from his phone. The next few days were blurry. I floated through them like a ghost, going through the motions but not really present. I avoided them as best I could, timing my coffee runs around their routines, skipping the kitchen altogether when Jessica was home. But avoidance doesn't protect you from pain. It only delays it. The final straw wasn't one big, explosive moment. It was death by 1,000 tiny cuts. One morning, I overheard Jessica on the phone in the hallway, talking to her friend Lacey. She was laughing, her voice carrying through the house. "No, she's still here. I know it's ridiculous. But Daniel feels guilty. I mean, she basically handed over the house. So now we're stuck with her in the basement like some sad old house elf." She laughed. Loud, sharp, cruel. My heart stopped. House elf. Like I was a creature from a story, pitiful and unwanted, tolerated only because they felt obligated. I stepped into the hallway and she turned around, phone still pressed to her ear. Her face paled for a second, but only for a second. "Oh, she's right here," she said into the phone. "Gotta go." She hung up, not even pretending to be embarrassed. "You weren't supposed to hear that," she said flatly. "I did," I replied. There was a pause, a thick silence hanging between us like a storm cloud. And then she said it again, slower this time, enunciating each word like a knife. "If you don't like it, maybe it's time you find somewhere else to be." No apology, no shame. That night, I pulled out my old suitcase from the back of the storage closet. I didn't pack it, not yet. But I set it on the bed and stared at it for a long time. I spent hours awake thinking. I thought about the Christmas mornings I spent sewing Daniel's pajamas because we couldn't afford new ones. I thought about the countless nights I stayed up waiting for him to come home safely from college parties, praying for a text. I thought about the morning I handed him the deed to this house with trembling hands, saying, "This is yours now. Build a family here." And I thought about the silence. How he let her erase me, belittle me, humiliate me, all in the name of keeping the peace. I was a mother, woman, person, and I'd become a shadow in my own life. The next day I called an old friend, Linda. We'd worked together at the post office for years. She retired 2 years before me and had moved to a little cottage in a quiet lakeside town a few hours away. I hadn't spoken to her much since the pandemic. Life got busy. But I remembered her saying once, "If you ever need to disappear for a bit, you're always welcome here." So I called. My hands shook as the phone rang. "Margaret," she answered on the second ring. "Is everything okay?" Broke down. Right there on the phone. All the tears I hadn't let fall came pouring out like a flood. I told her everything. Not just the insults but the loneliness. The humiliation. The silence. She listened. She didn't interrupt. And when I finished she said softly, Come here. You don't have to explain anything else. Just come." The next morning I packed. I didn't say goodbye. Daniel was at work. Jessica was at yoga. I packed 2 suitcases, clothes, photos, my crochet needles, and the old locket my husband gave me on our wedding day. I left everything else. Before I walked out, I left a note on the kitchen counter. "I'm not the help. I'm not the maid. I'm not your background. I'm your mother, Daniel. I gave you everything I had. And now I'm taking back the only thing I have left, my dignity. Don't come looking for me until you remember who I am." Mom closed the door behind me. The air outside felt different, crisper, lighter, like I could breathe for the first time in years. Linda's town was quiet, peaceful. Her cottage sat on the edge of a lake, with a tiny garden out back and a white porch swing that creaked just a little in the wind. I stayed in her guest room, and for the first time in a long time, I woke up without dread sitting on my chest. She made me tea every morning. We went on slow walks, talked about silly things, laughed about our postal routes, old co-workers, and the time a goose chased her car for 2 blocks. I started crocheting again, made a blanket for her granddaughter, read books in the sun, wrote in a journal. I started remembering who I was, before the silence, before the servitude. A week passed, then 2. I didn't hear from Daniel. Not a single call. No text. Nothing. It hurt, God, it hurt. But it also told me everything I needed to know. He wasn't ready. Maybe he never would be. But I was done waiting. "She abandoned us," Jessica said. "She just walked out. Didn't even have the decency to say goodbye." I saw the clip by accident. A friend had sent me a link on Facebook, not realizing who it was about. There was Jessica, sitting on a couch in a neat little video titled Mother-in-Law Drama, When Boundaries Are Broken. A podcast apparently, one where she was now some kind of lifestyle advisor. She painted herself as the victim, the exhausted daughter-in-law forced to house her overbearing mother-in-law. "I tried everything," she said to the host, voice perfectly rehearsed. "But there comes a point where you have to protect your space." We never asked her to stay. She just lingered. My blood ran cold. I wasn't shocked, not really. But hearing her rewrite the truth so effortlessly, watching her lie so smoothly, it did something to me. Like a match struck inside my chest. She called me the help in my own house, and now she wanted to erase the rest, turn me into a villain for her audience, her followers, her brand. What she didn't know was that I'd found my voice again. And I wasn't afraid to use it. That evening I sat with Linda on her porch swing, watching the sunset bleed across the lake. I told her everything. Every word from the podcast. Every twisting of the truth. She didn't speak at first, just shook her head slowly. "You deserve to tell your side, Margaret," she said at last. "The whole world is built on people like you. Quiet women who give and give and give, until someone tells their story for them. She was right. So I started writing. At first it was just a letter, one I never intended to send. I wrote about the house. The years I spent building it from scratch with my late husband. The winters we froze under too thin blankets and laughed over burnt toast because the oven was broken again. The way Daniel used to sit on the counter while I baked, legs swinging, asking if angels had birthdays. I wrote about the pride I felt signing that deed over to him. The belief, foolish maybe, that love and legacy were the same thing. That family would remember. I wrote about Jessica. How I tried, Lord knows I tried. I hosted her baby shower. I rubbed her back through nausea. I made her soup when she got the flu. Stayed up with the baby when she couldn't handle the cries. I gave more than I had time, energy, space. And I wrote about the moment she looked me in the eye and said, "If you don't like it here, leave." Left. And the world didn't end. I finished the letter with a simple truth. I am not a burden. I am not the help. I am a mother, woman. And I'm done apologizing for existing. I posted it to a small forum for older women, a quiet corner of the internet where people told their stories, offered kindness, and remembered each other's names. I signed it ML. 67 years old, still standing. I thought that would be the end of it. But the next day the message board exploded. Hundreds of replies. Thousands of views. Then tens of thousands. Women and even men writing, "This is my story too. I thought I was the only one. You put into words what I never could." One woman wrote, "I've been invisible in my daughter's house for 5 years. Yesterday I packed a suitcase." Another, "They made me eat in the garage during family dinners. I thought it was normal. Thank you for showing me it's not." People shared it on Facebook, on Twitter, on Instagram. They turned my words into images, quotes, videos. A retired schoolteacher in Oregon turned the post into a dramatic reading on TikTok. It went viral. Suddenly my story wasn't just mine anymore. It was ours. A week later I got a message request. It was from Daniel. I stared at it for a long time. My hand trembled as I opened it. "Mom, I don't know what to say. I saw everything. I read your post. I didn't know you felt that way. Thought you were okay. I'm sorry." That was it. No flowers. No grand declarations. Just a few lines of regret. Should have meant something. And part of me wanted to believe it did. But it came too late. Because regret is not the same as change. I didn't respond. Not right away. Instead I sat with that message for days. I thought about what I would have done a year ago. How I'd have jumped at the smallest scrap of remorse, the tiniest gesture, hungry for validation. But I wasn't that woman anymore. One evening, I opened my journal and wrote down the hardest truth I'd learned. Some children don't deserve your silence. Others don't deserve your voice. And a few don't deserve your love. But you always deserve your own peace. I wasn't seeking revenge. I didn't want Jessica ruined or Daniel dragged through the mud. I didn't want my story twisted into a weapon. I just wanted the truth to exist somewhere, where it couldn't be buried, ignored, or rewritten. And now it did. Linda smiled when I told her what happened. She'd started calling me Phoenix, said I'd risen from the ashes. We laughed about that. But somewhere deep inside I believed her. Because I hadn't just walked away from a house. I had walked away from a lifetime of self-erasure. And with every word I shared, every woman who wrote back saying, "Me too," I felt a little stronger. Crocheted again. Gardened. I volunteered at a local shelter helping seniors file paperwork, set up email accounts, write letters to estranged families. I got my hands dirty with life again. And I finally felt clean. "You should have told me no sooner, Mom. Maybe I wouldn't have let her treat you that way." That's what Daniel finally said to me. Weeks after the post went viral, after the comments flooded in, after people he didn't even know were tagging him, asking how he could allow his mother to be treated like that. And even then, it wasn't an apology. It was an excuse. Came in the form of a voicemail. I listened to it once, sitting on the dock behind Linda's cottage with the wind rustling through the pine trees. Then I played it again, slower this time. He sounded nervous. Ashamed maybe. But he never actually said, "I'm sorry." He never said, "You didn't deserve that." He never said, "I was wrong." I sat there for a long while after that, the phone resting on my knee like a weight I didn't want to carry anymore. For years I had begged, silently, sometimes in whispers, sometimes just in my heart, for Daniel to see me. Not just as a mother but as a woman. Person. Someone whose love was not a given, whose kindness wasn't an unlimited resource. And now that he saw, it was too late. The strange thing about peace is that it doesn't come like a tidal wave. Comes like a tide. Quiet. Patient. It creeps into the corners of your life without you realizing, until one day, you breathe without holding your shoulders up. You smile without wondering if it will be noticed. You wake up without dread. That's what began to happen to me. I started walking every morning, through the little town square where people waved and said, "Good morning," without wanting anything. I stopped coloring my hair. Let the gray show. I liked it. Felt honest. I joined a book club with women my age. Mostly widows, a few divorced, all with complicated stories of their own. They didn't care about Daniel or Jessica. They cared about me. One afternoon, Linda and I sat by the lake, sipping iced tea when she turned to me and asked, "If they came here tomorrow, what would you say?" I didn't answer right away. Because truthfully I didn't know. Would I shout? Cry? Hug him? Walk away? I think I'd ask him to sit, I finally said. And I'd tell him what he missed. The small things. The good things. She smiled. Then you're healing. But healing isn't neat. It's not some clean upward path. It's jagged. Uneven. There were still nights I woke up thinking I heard his footsteps upstairs. Still moments I set out a second cup of coffee without thinking. Grief doesn't only come when someone dies. Comes when someone lives. But lets you disappear. Still I kept building. One of the women in the book club, Carla, mentioned that the community center was looking for volunteers to lead a skills circle for older residents. Things like quilting, knitting, journaling. I signed up to lead crochet classes. My hands still remembered the rhythm. I crocheted with women who had been forgotten in their own families. One, Agnes, said, "My grandson told me I'm too slow to be useful." Another, Miriam, whispered, "My daughter-in-law told me I'm ruining the kids with my old-fashioned ways." And I saw it. That look. That heaviness. I knew it too well. So we made space. Not just for yarn and patterns but for tears and laughter. Stories of kindness turned into regret. Stories of giving too much, being thanked too little. We didn't just make blankets. We made each other visible again. And the most surprising thing happened. People started showing up. Not just seniors. Younger women. Women in their 30s and 40s. "I saw your post," they'd say. "I sent it to my mom. I never realized. I was becoming her Jessica." And some of them cried. They wrote letters to their mothers. Called them. Apologized. One young woman, Clara, brought her mother to our group. They learned to crochet together. They healed stitch by stitch. That's when I knew the story wasn't just about me. It was bigger than my house. Bigger than the insult. Bigger than Jessica. It was about a generation of women who were never allowed to say, "I'm hurt." So I started speaking. Not online, but in person, community halls, retirement centers, even a small college class. I told the truth. No bitterness. No hate. Just truth. The truth that being kind doesn't mean being silent. That being a mother doesn't mean being invisible. That one day, if you let people treat you like the help, they'll forget you were ever the heart of the home. One night I got a letter in the mail. Handwritten. No return address. Just a single page folded neatly inside. It read, "Margaret, I said things I can't take back. I treated you like furniture. Something to be used, not cherished. Daniel may not have the courage to say it, but I will. I was wrong. You were never the help. You were the only one helping. Sorry. And I hope someday you find joy again. Jessica." I read it 3 times. Then I set it down and walked outside, barefoot, feeling the grass between my toes. And I laughed, not because it was funny, but because something inside me finally let go. She was right. I was the only one helping. And now I had helped myself, not through revenge, not through fury, but by standing up, by walking away, by refusing to let my story be told by someone else. You don't owe them silence anymore. You owe yourself peace. Linda said that to me the night before I moved into my new place. A cozy, sunlit cottage just 5 miles from the town center. Nothing extravagant, but every part of it was mine. The walls were soft cream, the kitchen smelled of fresh wood, and the garden in the back already had a patch of lavender growing from the previous owner. It felt like a place where no one could come in and call me invisible again. I'd spent a year rebuilding, not just a life but a sense of self. And somehow, without realizing, I'd stopped needing Daniel's approval. I'd stopped longing for Jessica to say the right words, or for that house to be mine again. 'Cause I was home now. The move itself was quiet. A few friends from the center helped me load boxes. Carla brought coffee and muffins. Linda cried a little when we hung my wind chimes by the front door. I stood on the porch that evening, looking out over the quiet road, and I thought about all the women who never got this moment. Who stayed in places where their worth was reduced to chores, meals, and silence. Who were dismissed as just grandma or too much or in the way. And I whispered, "This is for you too." A week later, something happened I didn't expect. Daniel showed up. Not at my house. He wouldn't have known the address. He came to the community center, where I was teaching a Saturday crochet session. I saw him through the window first, pacing nervously outside, clutching something in his hand. I didn't panic. I didn't cry. I just watched. After 10 minutes he came in. The room fell quiet. The other women looked from him to me, their needles frozen mid-loop. "Mom," he said softly. "Can we talk?" I stood up and walked toward the hallway. My hands were steady. We sat on a bench just outside the room, facing the wall. I didn't speak. He did. "I messed up," he said. "I let her get away with treating you like you didn't matter. I convinced myself that because you weren't complaining, it was okay." I looked at him, waiting, listening. "She told me you were fine, that you wanted to help, that you were comfortable. I believed it because it was easier than facing the truth." He paused, swallowed hard. "And when you left, I thought you were being dramatic. I told myself you'd come back when you calmed down. But then I saw how people reacted to your story. How many women said the same thing happened to them. I realized. I never saw you. I just used you." That word landed like a stone. Not because it hurt, but because it was true. And hearing him say it was like watching someone finally open their eyes after years in the dark. He handed me what he'd been holding. It was a photo, an old one. Me and him when he was 5, sitting on the front steps of the old house. He was laughing. I was barefoot, holding a popsicle for him and one for myself. We looked like a team. "I forgot this version of you," he whispered. Took the photo. And for the first time in a long time I smiled at him. "I never changed," I said. "You just stopped looking." He nodded, tears in his eyes. "I want to do better. I want to be in your life again. Not for help. Not for favors. Just to know you." I didn't answer right away. Because forgiveness, like healing, isn't instant. It doesn't come just because someone finally sees the light. Has to be earned. So I said, "You're welcome to try." And then I walked back into my crochet group, because I had a room full of women waiting to learn how to double stitch, and I wasn't going to let anything take that away from me again. Daniel didn't follow. He stayed in the hallway. That was enough. Weeks passed. He started writing letters. Real ones. Stories from his childhood, memories of his father, drawings from his children. No demands. No pressure. Just slow rebuilding. I didn't respond to every letter. But I read each one. And little by little, my heart softened. Jessica never reached out again. But I didn't need her to. Because the peace I found wasn't rooted in anyone's apology. It was rooted in the fact that I had left when it mattered most. That I hadn't waited for someone to rescue me from their cruelty. That I had chosen myself. I spoke at a senior advocacy conference a few months later. The theme was Unseen No More. I stood on a stage in front of hundreds of women, many with silver hair, some with walkers, all with stories. I told them what happened. I told them about the house, the insult, the walkout, and the porch swing at Linda's. I told them this. They called me the help. But I was the heart. And when the heart stops beating for others who don't care, it starts beating for itself again. The room erupted into applause. Cried. Not from sadness. From pride. Because I had done what so many are too afraid to do. I had walked out of the house that forgot who built it. And I had built something better just for me. Now I live in my cottage with my garden, my books, and my dog. A scrappy mutt named Rosie who follows me like a shadow and sleeps at my feet while I write letters back to the women who still message me every week. Women who say, "You helped me find my voice." And that, more than anything, is how I know I was never just the help. I was the change. And I still am.